They called it Iron Bottom Sound long before I ever set foot there, though back then I thought it was just a sailor's nickname, a dark joke. What I didn't know was that the name wasn't about the iron that floated. It was about the iron that had already sunk. Hundreds of ships, Japanese and American, lying in black water graves so deep the sun never touched them. And those ships didn't always stay sunk. I remember the first night we sailed through those waters in 1942. The Guadalcanal campaign had just begun, and our destroyer was assigned to patrol the channel. The jungle loomed black on either side, moonlight catching the palm tops. The air was thick with smoke, salt, and fear. We knew the Japanese Navy was out there. We could feel them. But what we saw that night wasn't any ship that should have been there. The watchmen were the first to notice. "Lights off the port bow," one of them whispered. We all crowded toward the rail, and there it was, a cruiser, or at least the shadow of one, gliding silently across the waves. No engine noise, no radar return, just the faint flicker of firelight glowing from her broken hull. I swear on my life, I saw men on her deck, faces pale, helmets tilted back, staring at us across the water. They didn't shout, they didn't fire, they only drifted, and then, as a patch of fog rolled in, they were gone. We tried to laugh it off, to call it nerves, tricks of moonlight, but the sea doesn't lie. And in Iron Bottom Sound, the sea has a memory. That was the night I realized Guadalcanal wasn't just a battlefield. It was a graveyard. And some graves don't stay quiet. If you want to hear the rest of this haunted journey through the waters of Guadalcanal, make sure to like this video and subscribe. There are darker nights ahead. The second night proved the first hadn't been some trick of nerves. We were steaming along at reduced speed, the jungle a black wall to starboard, the open channel on our port side. Radar scanned empty. Sonar reported nothing. Yet just past midnight, the forward lookout froze, binoculars pressed to his face. I'll never forget the tone in his voice. "Cruiser off the bow. Range 2,000 yards. The captain demanded confirmation. Nothing showed on the instruments. But then we saw it with our own eyes. A Japanese heavy cruiser sliding across the moonlit sea. Her silhouette was perfect. High bow, twin stacks, guns trained outward. Yet she moved without sound, her hull gleaming as if wet with oil and fire. The order came. Battle stations. Men scrambled to their posts, boots hammering steel decks, ammunition belts clattering. My hands shook as I loaded the 5-inch gun. We braced for return fire, but it never came. The cruiser just kept moving, her decks lined with sailors standing motionless at attention, as if carved from wax. I swear I saw their faces, some missing jaws, some hollow eyes. One officer stood with binoculars to his face, glass shattered, blood frozen across his uniform. And still, he stared back at us. Then, without warning, the cruiser dipped into a low bank of fog, and when the mist rolled clear, the sea was empty. No wake, no wreckage, not even a ripple. The deck was silent. Men stared at each other with wide eyes, their knuckles white on their weapons. One sailor muttered a prayer, another crossed himself. I just kept my gaze on the water, waiting for something, anything, to prove I hadn't lost my mind. But the sea gave us nothing. Later, the radio room reported strange static at the exact moment of the sighting. Screams, they said, Japanese voices. But when they tried to play it back, all that was left was dead air. That was the first true encounter. And deep down, Every man on board knew it. We weren't alone out here. The living fought on the surface, but below, the dead had their own fleet. The first time the guns opened for real, the sea itself seemed to split apart. It was November 1942, the height of the struggle for Guadalcanal. Japanese battleships and cruisers poured shells into Henderson Field at night, while our destroyers and cruisers fought to stop them. The water was alive with searchlights, tracers, and explosions so bright they lit the jungle ridges like daylight. Our ship joined the column in the sound, engines at full ahead. The captain's voice echoed down the steel corridors. Targets to port, fire at will. My ears rang as the 5-inch guns thundered, the whole deck shaking beneath my boots. Shell casings rolled hot across the steel. Above us, Japanese flares burst, raining ghostly white light across the water. But in that chaos, I saw something no battle map could explain. Through the smoke and gun flashes, a burning destroyer charged straight into our formation. Its bow aflame, men ablaze on deck, their uniforms charred beyond recognition. I shouted a warning, but the officers gave no order. We braced for collision. And then, it simply wasn't there. The fire, the men, the whole damn ship, gone, leaving only waves lapping at our hull. I wasn't the only one who saw it. Gun crews swore they'd tracked her with their sights, ready to fire. One sailor swore he heard screams across the water, men calling in Japanese and English, begging for help as their ship went down. The nightmare didn't stop there. In the confusion, tracers stitched across the night sky, but some of them seemed to hang in the air, frozen like fireflies. I watched in disbelief as a phantom cruiser fired a full broadside at us, flashes from her turrets, smoke curling from her barrels. Yet no shells came, just silence. And then she flickered, half there, half gone, dissolving back into the dark. Still, plenty of steel was real enough. Japanese shells screamed overhead, smashing into nearby cruisers. One of our destroyers took a direct hit and went up like a torch. Men leapt into the black water, their cries mixing with the hollow echoes of voices that weren't ours. For every living sailor screaming for rescue, it felt like 10 ghostly voices joined them, rising from below the waves. By dawn, the sound was littered with burning wreckage. We pulled survivors aboard, men shivering, eyes wide, muttering about ships that weren't there, enemies that couldn't die. The brass blamed nerves, battle stress, imagination. But those of us who saw it, who knew what we saw, never spoke of it outside the crew. Because the truth was worse than fear. In Iron Bottom Sound, you never fought the living alone. They called it the Tokyo Express. Those endless nighttime runs where the Japanese tried to slip destroyers and transports through the slot to feed their starving garrisons. We'd fought them often enough to know the drill. Radar contact, flares in the sky, a sudden rush of shells and torpedoes. But one night, what we saw wasn't the Tokyo Express. It was something else entirely. We were steaming near Savo Island, moonless night, black water stretching in every direction. Radar suddenly lit up with returns, a whole column, maybe 6 or 7 ships, closing in fast. The alarm went up, gunners at the ready, officers bracing for another bloodbath. And then we saw them with our own eyes. Transports, tall silhouettes stacked with supplies, destroyer escorts flanking their sides. It looked like a perfect textbook resupply run. Floodlights swept across their decks, and that's when my stomach dropped. The men on those ships weren't moving like soldiers. They stood stiffly in rows along the rails, heads turned toward us, faces pale as wax in the moonlight. I swear I saw one lift his arm, not to wave, but to point, straight at us. The captain ordered fire. Batteries roared to life, tracer shells slamming into the convoy. But when they struck the hulls, there was no explosion. The rounds passed through like smoke, splashes in the sea behind them. Our star shells illuminated the formation, but the more light we threw, the less real it looked. Shadows bled through steel. The convoy flickered like a bad reel of film, ships dissolving, reappearing, shifting in and out of focus. The Marines on Guadalcanal later swore they'd seen it too, from the shoreline, a whole phantom fleet sliding past Cape Esperance. Some even claimed to see pale figures unloading crates onto the beach, stacking them carefully before vanishing with their cargo. On our deck, one of the younger sailors panicked, screaming that he could see his brother, who had died weeks earlier on the transport George F. Elliot when it went up in flames. The boy nearly jumped overboard trying to reach him. We chased that convoy for miles, but it always stayed ahead, always just out of reach. And then, as the first hint of dawn touched the horizon, the entire formation simply faded, one ship at a time, until the sea was empty, as if nothing had ever been there at all. But when we looked down at the waves, floating beside our hull were empty ration tins, waterlogged crates with Japanese markings, and a single helmet bobbing silently in the swells. And I'll never forget the smell that rose up from the water. Not salt, not fuel, but smoke and burnt flesh. The stench of ships that had already burned, already sunk, and should never have sailed again. Iron Bottom Sound had shown us its fleet, and we all knew the ghosts weren't done with us.
By December, the Sound was so thick with wrecks, we joked you could walk across them if you had the guts. Destroyers, cruisers, transports, whole fleets littered the seabed. But none of us laughed when the order came. Send divers down for salvage. Fuel, ammo, food, anything we could get was worth the risk. I stood on deck, watching the diving team suit up. They were tough men, steady hands, but even they looked uneasy. The sea was calm, deceptively calm, the sun glinting on the waves. Beneath us lay the twisted bones of a Japanese transport that had gone down weeks earlier. The first diver vanished under the surface, bubbles rising for a moment before being swallowed by silence. We waited. A minute passed, 2. Then the phone line crackled with a whisper that wasn't his. A garbled voice, speaking Japanese, wet, broken, as if it came from underwater lungs. The topside crew froze. "Repeat," the officer demanded. But there was no answer, just static and faint sobbing. When the diver surfaced, his face was pale behind the mask. He swore he'd seen men still at their stations, sailors slumped over guns, eyes open, mouths moving, engines turning in the dark, gears grinding though no hand touched them. He tore the mask off, vomiting seawater he hadn't swallowed. The second team went down later, and they came back worse. One man babbled about knocking on steel from the inside, like someone trapped was banging on the bulkhead. Another claimed he saw a light flickering through the portholes, the glow of lanterns carried by men who'd been dead for weeks. He refused to go back down again, no matter the threat of court-martial. At night, lying in my rack, I could swear I heard it too, a low thrumming beneath the hull, deep and steady, like the heartbeat of a machine still running far below. Sometimes it grew louder, as if a whole convoy steamed right under us,
unseen, unheard, but felt in our bones. The old hands whispered that Iron Bottom Sound was alive now, that the ships down there hadn't stopped fighting, that every night, below the surface, they still battled, forever sinking, forever burning, forever dying. One night, as I stood watch, I looked over the side and froze. In the moonlight, just beneath the waves, I saw them. Faint outlines of ships glowing faintly blue, rolling silently along the bottom. I swear I saw men walking the decks, rifles on their shoulders, marching to orders long since given. Their eyes caught the moonlight like silver coins, and when I blinked, they were gone. But I can still hear them when the sea is quiet. The hum of engines, the grind of chains, the endless march of the drowned. Iron Bottom Sound was not just a graveyard. It was a battlefield still raging, hidden under the waves, and we were only guests above it.
We used to think the sea held the curse, that Iron Bottom Sound was where the dead lingered. But soon we learned the island itself wasn't spared. Guadalcanal's soil had drunk too much blood to rest easy. The Marines dug in along the beaches, waiting for the next Tokyo Express. Nights were the worst, humid, silent, every palm tree swaying like a watcher. Then came the phantom fire. It started with the thunder of naval guns offshore. Marines scrambled, taking cover, sandbags shuddering as shells whistled overhead. Explosions lit the night, but when the dust cleared, there were no craters, no incoming fire. The shoreline was untouched, yet the smell of cordite clung in the air. Some swore they saw muzzle flashes out at sea, warships trading broadsides in the dark, but binoculars showed only mist. Still, the water glowed faintly orange, as if lit by burning wrecks beneath the surface. Then came the flares, dozens of them, bright white parachute lights drifting slowly from the heavens, hissing in the night. Entire platoons crouched low, rifles trained, certain an attack was coming. But the flares made no sound, no smoke, no ash when they fizzled out. They just winked away, like lanterns carried into the void. Marines in the jungle told even stranger stories. Patrols swore they saw Japanese troops moving between the trees, bayonets gleaming, helmets bobbing. But when they opened fire, the figures dissolved like mist. Others claimed to hear boots crunching leaves right behind them, only to turn and find no one there. One night I was ashore, helping unload crates by lantern light. I heard it too, the rhythmic tramp of boots, a column on the march. It grew louder, closer, until I froze by the waterline. Out of the palms they came, a line of shadowy figures, Soviet silhouettes at first glance, but wrong. Their uniforms flickered from Japanese khaki to US Marine greens, shifting like smoke. Each one carried a rifle on his shoulder, eyes fixed ahead, faces pale and expressionless. They marched past us and straight into the surf. Not a splash, not a ripple, just gone into the black water. The men whispered that Guadalcanal itself had become a second sound, that the island's jungle was as haunted as the depths. The dead walked ashore at night, retracing their last steps, fighting battles only they could see. By dawn, the jungle was still, the beach was quiet, but the foxholes were filled with men who hadn't slept, staring wide-eyed at a world where even silence carried ghosts. And in the morning light, we found footprints on the sand, hundreds of them, leading into the sea.
By late November, the sea, the shore, even the jungle had turned against us. But what came next was worse, because it crawled into the one place we trusted most, our radios. The first time it happened, We were steaming just north of Guadalcanal. The radio room lit up with a sudden transmission. Japanese, sharp and urgent. The operator called the bridge, swearing he heard coordinates and orders for a night bombardment. The captain barked to log it, pass it up the chain. But when intelligence checked, there'd been no transmission, no Japanese ship in range. We laughed it off, blaming tired ears and bad static, until it happened again. One midnight, the radio blared with panicked voices, not in code, but in broken Japanese. Screams of men drowning, choking, calling for their mothers. The operator froze, his hand hovering over the dial, sweat dripping down his neck. The voices cut suddenly to silence, then returned in English, clear as day. They're still here. I was there when it happened. I heard it with my own ears. After that, the radio turned traitor. Every night, the static carried something new. Orders from ships that had sunk weeks earlier. Roll calls of men who were dead. Once, an old Japanese song drifted over the channel, a war ballad, low and mournful. And as it played, the deck crew swore they saw lanterns flickering across the black water. Marines ashore weren't spared either. Their field radios spat out fragments, phantom artillery requests, ghostly cries for medics. One unit swore they received a fire mission from a captain who'd been killed the week before. They obeyed, shelling the coordinates. But when dawn came, the only things they'd hit were trees and shadows. Some men tried to laugh it off, call it a radio curse. Others started smashing sets with rifle butts, terrified of what might whisper through the static next. But the truth we couldn't deny was this: the dead had found a voice. One night, I lingered in the radio shack, listening. Through the static came faint knocking, like fists rapping on steel. Then a voice, not Japanese, not English, but familiar. It was my brother's voice. He'd been dead since Pearl Harbor. He said my name, just once. I yanked the headset off, heart pounding. When the operator asked what I heard, I lied. I said it was nothing. But I knew it wasn't. On Guadalcanal, even the air was haunted. Every wave of static carried more than just sound. It carried the memories of men who refused to be forgotten. And sometimes, if you listened too long, they called you by name. December nights in Iron Bottom Sound were a living hell. The Japanese kept coming, wave after wave, and we matched them ship for ship. But that night, I swear we weren't fighting alone. It began like any other clash, star shells bursting overhead, painting the jungle ridges in sickly white. The sea erupted with tracers and gunfire. Our destroyer pounded targets off Savo Island, the deck shuddering beneath every blast. My ears rang, my hands blistered from the heat of the shell casings. And then I saw them. Through the smoke, beyond the line of our formation, an entire fleet appeared, ships burning, guns blazing. Some flew Japanese flags, others American. Their silhouettes glowed like molten steel, rolling forward with impossible speed. The water boiled under their keels, but no wake followed. At first, I thought they were real, reinforcements maybe, or a trick of the light. But when we trained our guns and fired, the shells passed through. Our tracers punched holes in smoke, splashing harmlessly beyond. Yet the ghost fleet fired back. I saw muzzle flashes, the flare of torpedoes, even the thunder of guns. But no shells struck. Only the sound of death echoed across the water. The men panicked. Some dropped to the deck, covering their heads. Others fired blindly, screaming curses into the night. One sailor swore he saw his own cousin on the deck of a phantom destroyer, waving at him from the flames. Another claimed the ship that torpedoed us wasn't Japanese at all, but the USS Astoria, one of our cruisers sunk months earlier, charging forward ablaze. It was chaos. The living fleet and the dead one clashed together, indistinguishable in the storm of fire and smoke. We were trapped in the middle, fighting enemies we couldn't touch, watching ships that no longer existed ram through the waves beside us. The captain barked orders, trying to keep discipline, but his voice was lost in the storm. Even he froze when a phantom battleship loomed out of the smoke, her decks ablaze, her guns pointed straight at us. We braced for impact, and then she passed clean through our hull, her fire vanishing into the night. By dawn, the sea was calm again. The sound was littered with real wreckage, real bodies, real oil fires smoldering on the waves. But the casualty reports didn't match what we'd seen. Ships that had appeared destroyed were still afloat. Others that no one remembered taking hits had vanished. Men whispered of a ghost fleet, doomed to fight forever, replaying the battles of Guadalcanal long after the living had moved on. That night, I learned the worst truth of all. In Iron Bottom Sound, the dead had their own war. And sometimes we got caught in the crossfire.
By January 1943, the campaign was turning, but Iron Bottom Sound didn't care about victory or loss. The dead still ruled those waters. That month, men began disappearing, not in battle, in silence. Sailors simply vanished from their posts at night, their rifles left neatly by the rail, helmets on the deck. Searchlights swept the water, but nothing stirred except the waves. When dawn came, sometimes we found them floating face down, sometimes not at all. At first, we blamed nerves, desertion, even suicide. But then the survivors started talking. One swore he'd heard his brother's voice calling from the water, begging him to come closer. Another said he'd seen hands reaching up through the foam, pale fingers brushing the hull. And when I looked into their eyes, I knew they weren't lying. They were men who'd seen something they couldn't explain. I saw it myself soon after. Standing watch on the port side, the sea calm as glass, I caught movement below. At first, it looked like reflections of stars. Then I realized they were faces, dozens of them, drifting just under the surface, eyes wide, mouths moving silently. Japanese and American both, side by side. Their arms stretched upward, reaching. I staggered back, breath stuck in my throat. For a moment I swore I felt a tug at my boots, a pull from below, gentle but insistent, like the tide itself wanted me. That night, Seaman Harris nearly walked straight off the deck. Petrov and I grabbed him just in time, hauling him back. His eyes were glazed, lips moving in whispers. "They're calling me," he muttered. "They want me home." We never let him stand watch alone again. Some men began hearing Japanese voices in their dreams, shouting orders, weeping, singing. Others woke drenched in seawater, though their bunks were dry. One petty officer refused to sleep below deck at all, convinced drowned sailors were knocking from the bulkheads, asking to be let in. The chaplain tried to bless the ship, sprinkling salt water across the guns and passageways. For a few nights, the whispers seemed to quiet, but then came the storm. Waves pounded the sound, lightning flashing across the sky. In the howling wind, I heard them, hundreds of voices, shrieking, crying, some in English, some in Japanese. I leaned over the rail, rain stinging my face,
And there they were again, the drowned, clinging to invisible ladders, crawling up toward us, their faces pale in the lightning. I tore myself away, heart hammering, and ran below. But even there, the pounding followed me. Boots on steel, fists on doors, voices through the pipes. The ship itself groaned as if the dead were inside, trying to tear their way out. When morning came, the storm broke, the sea calm again. But half the crew swore they'd seen the same thing, and 2 men were missing. No splash had been heard, no cries, just gone, taken into the sound. That's when I knew the truth. Iron Bottom Sound wasn't just haunted, it was hungry. The war ended. We sailed home. The world moved on. But the sound never left me. For years after, I tried to forget. I married, raised children, worked a steady job. Yet every night, when the house grew quiet, I still heard it. The low hum of engines, the faint thump of guns, the whisper of voices calling from the deep. 2 decades later, I returned. A veteran's tour to Guadalcanal. The island was changed, villages rebuilt, airstrips paved, jungles creeping back over the scars of battle. But when we boarded a ferry to cross Iron Bottom Sound, my stomach clenched like it was 1942 again. The water was calm, flat as glass. The guide spoke cheerfully about history, pointing to Savo Island, Cape Esperance, Henderson Field. But I wasn't listening. My eyes were fixed on the horizon, where the sun bled red into the sea. And then I saw them. At first, just flickers, shadows against the waves. Then clearer, the outlines of ships, whole convoys gliding silently across the water. A cruiser ablaze from bow to stern, a destroyer listing hard, her guns still flashing. A transport stacked high with supplies, soldiers standing in neat rows on deck. The tourists didn't notice. Cameras clicked, children laughed. But I stared in silence as the sound filled with ghostly masts and funnels, flames that gave no heat, voices that carried no sound. I could even make out faces on the decks, Japanese, American, boys frozen in the last seconds of their lives, staring forever across the water. Their eyes caught the fading sunlight like glass, reflecting it back at me. My hands trembled on the rail. Part of me wanted to shout, to warn the others, but I knew it was pointless. These ghosts weren't here for them. They were here for me. As the ferry slid past the spot where my ship once fought, I swore I heard my name whispered on the wind. Just once, just enough to chill my blood. I never told the others what I saw. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. But I'll tell you this, the sound remembers. Every ship that sank, every man that drowned, every scream that echoed over those waters, they're still there. They'll always be there. And if you ever sail through Iron Bottom Sound on a quiet night, don't listen too closely, because the dead might start calling your name too.